Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin. The fluorescent lights above Station 7 flickered with their usual rhythm. 3 steady beats, then a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds. I'd been counting that pattern for 18 months, ever since I started the midnight intake shift at Millbrook Psychiatric Emergency. The rhythm became my metronome, keeping time as I processed the endless stream of admissions, transfers, and discharges that flowed through our doors between sunset and dawn. My station faced the main corridor, positioned so I could see every person who entered or left the secure wing. The admission desk was organized with military precision. Intake forms in the left drawer, patient wristbands in the center, my personal thermos of coffee, black, no sugar, always positioned exactly 3 inches from the keyboard. Order was everything in this job. When you're processing people at their most vulnerable moments, the paperwork becomes a lifeline for both of you. The night started like any other. 2 police transfers arrived at 12:47 a.m., a middle-aged man experiencing what the officers described as a psychotic episode, and a young woman found wandering the interstate. Standard protocol: photograph, personal effects inventory, medical screening, psychiatric evaluation scheduling. I'd performed these steps thousands of times, my hands moving through the motions while my mind cataloged details. The man's trembling signature on line 23. The woman's insistence that she needed to get back to the garden before sunrise. At 2:15 a.m. the phone rang. The caller ID showed internal transfer, Ward 0. I paused. Ward 0 didn't exist in our facility. Our psychiatric emergency department consisted of wards 1 through 8, plus the observation unit and the crisis stabilization area. I'd memorized every room number, every corridor, every restricted access point. There was no Ward 0. Millbrook intake, this is Sarah, I answered, following protocol. Transfer incoming, said a voice I didn't recognize. Female, professional, with the same measured tone I used during my own calls. ETA 3 minutes. Paperwork already processed. The line went dead before I could ask for clarification. I checked the computer system, searching for any pending transfers. Nothing appeared in the queue. I called the main hospital operator to verify the internal call. She had no record of any transfer authorization. But 3 minutes later, the secure doors buzzed open, and a transport gurney rolled through, pushed by 2 orderlies I'd never seen before. The patient was awake, calm, staring at the ceiling with the sort of resignation I'd observed in long-term psychiatric cases. But something about her face seemed familiar, like seeing someone you know from a photograph but can't quite place. She was wearing a standard hospital gown and a patient identification wristband. "Where do you want her?" asked one of the orderlies. His voice was flat, professional. But when I looked at his ID badge, the photo was blurred, as if the lamination had been damaged by heat. "I need to see the transfer paperwork first," I said, maintaining my routine. "Room assignment, medical history, psychiatric evaluation." "Already processed," the orderly repeated, pointing to a manila folder on the gurney's side rail. "All signatures complete." I opened the folder and felt my breath catch. The intake form was filled out in my handwriting, my exact handwriting, down to the way I dotted my I's and crossed my T's, but I hadn't written it. The timestamp showed 1:47 a.m., and according to the form, I had personally authorized the transfer from Ward 0, long-term care. The patient's name on the form was Sarah Mitchell. My name. I looked at the patient's wristband more carefully. Mitchell Sarah, Dob 03/15/1989, Ward 0, permanent resident. My birth date. My full name. "There's been a mistake," I said, but when I looked up, the orderlies were gone. The gurney remained, and the patient, the other Sarah Mitchell, was looking directly at me. "You're late for your shift," she said quietly. Her voice was exactly like mine, but with a quality I'd never heard in my own speech. A resigned acceptance, as if she'd been waiting for this moment for years. I backed away from the gurney and returned to my computer, frantically searching the patient database. When I typed Mitchell Sarah, 2 entries appeared. The first was my employee record, showing I'd worked intake for 18 months. The second was a patient admission from 1:47 a.m. that night, admitted by myself. with a notation that read voluntary commitment, recognition of workplace integration completion. The security cameras showed me walking through the corridor at 1:47 a.m., but I had been at my desk the entire time. On the monitor, I watched myself push the gurney through the secure doors, wearing scrubs instead of my usual intake uniform. My recorded face had the same resigned expression as the patient lying in front of me. I looked at the admission form again. At the bottom, in the section marked Admitting Nurse Comments, I had apparently written, "Patient demonstrates full awareness of transition period. Has been functioning in intake role for 18 months as part of therapeutic integration, ready for return to permanent ward assignment." The patient, the other me, sat up slowly on the gurney. "The lights," she said, pointing to the fluorescent fixture above my desk. 3 beats, then a 2-second pause. "You've been counting them since you started working here, but you never wondered why they only flickered during your shift." I looked up at the lights. They were steady, bright, normal. No flicker at all. "The Ward 0 transfer logs show you've been receiving this same call every night for 18 months, she continued. "Same time, same voice, same protocol. But tonight was different. Tonight, you finally answered correctly." I checked my desk. My coffee thermos was gone. The admission forms in my left drawer had been replaced with discharge papers, all bearing my signature, all dated tonight, all authorizing my release from intake role, therapeutic assignment complete. The secure doors buzzed open again. 2 orderlies entered, the same ones who had brought the gurney, but now I could see their faces clearly. They looked like people I'd processed during my 18 months of intake duty. Patients I'd admitted, evaluated, and discharged, all of them wearing staff identification badges. "Time to go, Sarah," said the first orderly. "Your shift is over," as they wheeled me down the corridor. I could see through the window of Station 7. The other Sarah Mitchell was sitting at my desk, organizing intake forms with the same military precision I'd maintained. Her thermos was positioned exactly 3 inches from the keyboard. She was looking up at the fluorescent lights, and I could see her lips moving. Counting silently, the gurney turned a corner, and we passed a sign I'd never noticed before. "Ward 0, permanent care, staff integration complete." Some assignments, I realized, never really end. They just help you understand where you belonged all along. Dr. Marcus Henley had been speaking my name for 7 minutes before I realized the audio system wasn't supposed to be functioning in room 12. I'd started my psychiatric residency night shift at Millbrook 6 months earlier, assigned to monitor the observation ward from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. The setup was standard, 12 rooms arranged in a semicircle around a central monitoring station, each equipped with high-definition cameras and 2-way audio systems that could be activated at the attending physician's discretion. My job was straightforward: observe, document, intervene only when necessary. The monitoring station felt like mission control, 6 screens displaying live feeds, patient charts organized on a central desk, emergency protocols laminated and posted within arm's reach. I developed a routine of checking each room sequentially every 15 minutes, noting behaviors, medication compliance, and any signs of distress. Room 1, elderly woman with late-stage dementia, sleeping peacefully. Room 2, young man with bipolar disorder, sketching in a notebook. Room 3, middle-aged woman with severe depression, staring out the window. Room 12 had been empty when I started my shift. Dr. Henley appeared during my 2:30 a.m. rounds, sitting calmly on the edge of the bed as if he'd been there for hours. According to the admission logs, no patient had been assigned to room 12. The door locks showed no recent access, and the overnight charge nurse confirmed no transfers had occurred. Yet there he was, wearing standard-issue psychiatric ward clothing, looking directly into the camera with an expression of patient expectation. I activated the 2-way audio system, standard protocol for new observations. "Good evening," I said through the intercom. "I'm Dr. Williams. How are you feeling tonight?" He smiled, not the vacant smile I'd learned to associate with medication side effects, but a knowing expression that made me check his chart again. There was no chart, no admission paperwork, no medical history. The computer system showed room 12 as unoccupied. "Dr. Williams?" he said, his voice clear through the speakers. "Dr. James Williams, graduated from University of Michigan Medical School class of 2018, currently completing psychiatric residency at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital." Lives alone in apartment 4B at 247 Elm Street. I felt the temperature in the monitoring station drop several degrees. Patient knowledge of staff personal information was a significant security concern. But his tone wasn't threatening, it was conversational, as if he were reading from a file. How do you know that information? I asked, following protocol for potential security breaches. Dr. James Williams, he repeated. Born September 12, 1993. Mother's maiden name, Patterson. Scar on left knee from bicycle accident at age 8. I looked down at my knee instinctively. The scar was there, hidden beneath my scrubs, but definitely there. I'd never mentioned it to anyone at the hospital. I activated the silent alarm to alert security and continued the interaction, trying to keep him talking until help arrived, but he just kept repeating my name. Dr. James Williams. Dr. James Williams. Dr. James Williams. Over and over, in the same calm, measured tone. Not like someone experiencing psychosis or mania, like someone reciting information from memory. I muted the audio on my end and called security directly, but the phone line was dead. When I tried my cell phone, it showed no signal despite being on the ground floor of the building. I looked back at the monitor. Dr. Henley was still sitting on the bed, still speaking my name. But now he was looking directly at me, not at the camera, but at me, as if he could see through the monitor into the observation station. His lips moved in perfect synchronization with the words coming through the speakers, but something was wrong with the timing. The audio was reaching me a fraction of a second before his mouth moved. Dr. James Williams, Dr. James Williams, Dr. James Williams. I turned off the audio system, but his voice continued. I checked the controls. The system showed as disabled, but I could still hear him clearly, the sound seeming to come from the walls themselves. I decided to check on him directly. Room 12 was a 3-minute walk from the monitoring station, down the main corridor, and through 2 security doors. I grabbed my keycard and a portable radio, maintaining visual contact with the monitor until I left the station. The corridor was empty, lit by the usual combination of fluorescent ceiling fixtures and red emergency lighting. My footsteps echoed off the polished floors, and I could still hear Dr. Henley's voice faintly, as if it were following me through the ventilation system. When I reached room 12, I used my keycard to unlock the door. The electronic lock beeped once, and the heavy door swung open to reveal an empty room, completely empty. The bed was made with military precision, the small desk and chair positioned exactly as they were in every unoccupied room. No signs of recent occupancy, no impression on the bed sheets, no personal items, no indication anyone had been there. I checked the bathroom, the small closet, even under the bed. Nothing. But when I returned to the monitoring station, Dr. Henley was still there on the screen, sitting in the same position, speaking my name with the same measured rhythm. I grabbed the portable radio and called the charge nurse. This is Dr. Williams. I need someone to check room 12 immediately. Room 12 is unoccupied, doctor, came the reply. Has been all week. I'm looking at a patient on the monitor right now. I'm standing outside room 12, doctor. Door is locked, room is empty. I looked at the monitor again. Dr. Henley was no longer sitting on the bed. He was standing directly in front of the camera, his face filling the entire screen, mouth moving silently. But the audio had stopped. Then I realized what I was looking at. He wasn't in room 12 anymore. The background behind him wasn't the patient room. It was the monitoring station. My monitoring station. He was standing exactly where I was standing, looking into the same camera system. But from the other side. I turned around slowly. The monitoring station was empty except for me. But on the screen I could see Dr. Henley sitting in my chair, wearing my white coat, looking at a monitor that showed me standing and looking over my shoulder. I approached the screen carefully. As I got closer, Dr. Henley leaned forward in the chair, my chair, and placed his hand against the screen from the inside. I could see every detail of his palm pressed against the glass, but from my side the screen was smooth and cold. Then he spoke, and his voice came through the speakers with perfect clarity. Nightshift is different when you're on both sides of the glass. Dr. Williams. I looked at the other monitors. Every screen showed the same image. Dr. Henley sitting in the monitoring station, wearing my white coat, watching a figure that looked exactly like me standing in various patient rooms. In some screens I was sitting on the bed. In others I was pacing. In one I was standing at the window, looking out at nothing. I checked my reflection in the dark computer screen. I was still wearing my white coat, still holding my keycard and radio. But on the monitors, Dr. Henley was wearing the same coat, holding the same items, making the same movements I was making. The audio came through all 12 speakers simultaneously. Dr. James Williams, currently completing psychiatric residency at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital, assigned to overnight observation duty. Patient demonstrates acute awareness of dual positioning within monitoring system. I reached for the emergency phone, but Dr. Henley was already holding it on the screen, the receiver pressed to his ear. When I moved toward the door, he stood up from the chair and walked toward the same door on his side of the screen. We were perfectly synchronized. The observation period is complete. Dr. Williams, his voice echoed from every speaker. You can return to your room now. I looked at the screens one more time. In each monitor, the figure that looked like me was walking calmly toward the bed, removing the white coat, preparing for sleep. But I was still standing in the monitoring station, still watching. On the central screen, Dr. Henley sat back down in my chair and began checking the other monitors methodically. The same routine I performed every 15 minutes. Some observations, I realized, continue long after the shift is ended. The 2-hour mirror check protocol was implemented after the incident in 2019, when a patient managed to shatter a bathroom mirror and use the fragments for self-harm. Since then, every orderly on the night shift was required to perform visual inspections of all reflective surfaces in the psychiatric ward, ensuring both the integrity of the mirrors and the safety of the patients who use them. I'd been working as a psychiatric orderly at Millbrook for 3 years, long enough to develop an efficient routine for the mirror checks. Start with the common areas, the day room mirrors, the corridor reflection panels, the nurse's station glass. Then move systematically through the patient rooms, bathroom by bathroom, checking each reflective surface for cracks, chips, or any sign of tampering. The entire process took 45 minutes if done properly, leaving me 15 minutes to document everything before the next 2-hour cycle began. The patients had grown accustomed to the routine. Most ignored me entirely, continuing with their nighttime activities, reading, pacing, staring out windows, or trying to sleep despite the medication side effects that often caused insomnia. A few would acknowledge me with a nod or a quiet, "Good evening." The mirror checks were just another part of the institutional rhythm that governed life in the psychiatric ward. Room 23 housed David Carpenter, a 42-year-old man admitted 3 weeks earlier for severe depression with psychotic features. He was quiet, compliant with medication, and generally cooperative with staff. During my mirror checks, he would typically be sitting at his desk, writing in a journal the day shift nurse had provided. He never caused problems, never complained about the interruptions, never exhibited any of the agitation or paranoia common in patients with his diagnosis. The first anomaly occurred during my Thursday night shift at 2:47 a.m. I entered room 23 following standard. Protocol: knock twice, announce myself, enter with the door remaining open. David was standing at the bathroom sink, brushing his teeth, exactly as he had been during previous mirror checks. The bathroom mirror was intact, clean, properly secured to the wall, but his reflection wasn't moving in sync with his actions. David was brushing his teeth with steady, methodical strokes, but his reflection was brushing more slowly, as if the image was lagging behind reality by several seconds. I blinked, thinking it might be an optical illusion caused by the fluorescent lighting or fatigue from my long shift. When I looked again, the reflection had caught up, moving in perfect synchronization with David's movements. I made a note in my documentation. Room 23, mirror intact, no visible damage. Patient engaged in normal nighttime routine. 2 hours later, during my 4:47 a.m. check, David was standing in the same position at the bathroom sink. This time he was washing his hands, but his reflection was still brushing its teeth. The movements were completely different. David's hands moving in circular washing motions while his reflection continued. The vertical brushing pattern from 2 hours earlier cleared my throat to get his attention. David looked at me through the mirror, and his reflection looked at me too. But the reflection's mouth was still moving as if it were brushing teeth, even though David's lips were still. "Everything all right, David?" I asked, following protocol for unusual patient behavior. "Yes, sir," he replied, his voice clear and normal. "Just getting ready for bed." In the mirror, his reflection nodded, but its mouth moved as if it were saying something completely different. I couldn't hear any sound from the reflection, but I could see its lips forming words. Help me. I stepped closer to the mirror, positioning myself so I could see both David and his reflection clearly. David was drying his hands with a towel. Normal movements, normal behavior. His reflection was pressing both palms against the glass from the inside, mouth moving frantically, eyes wide with what appeared to be panic. David, can you step away from the mirror for a moment? He complied immediately, moving toward his bed. His reflection remained at the sink, hands pressed against the glass, mouth still moving silently. When David sat on his bed, his reflection stayed standing at the bathroom mirror. I left the room immediately and contacted the night supervisor. This is Williams. I need a second opinion on room 23. Supervisor Janet Morrison arrived within 5 minutes, bringing another orderly, Stevens, with her. When we entered room 23, David was sleeping peacefully in his bed. The bathroom mirror reflected the empty sink area normally. No figure, no pressing hands, no moving lips. What exactly did you see? Morrison asked, checking the mirror herself. I described the reflection lag, the mismatched movements, the apparent communication attempt. Both Morrison and Stevens examined the mirror carefully, testing it for any physical abnormalities or optical distortions. Everything appeared normal. Fatigue can cause visual hallucinations, Morrison noted in her report. Recommend Williams take a 15-minute break before continuing rounds. I accepted the explanation, but during my 6:47 a.m. mirror check, I brought Stevens with me to room 23. David was at the sink again, shaving with an electric razor. His reflection was shaving too, perfect synchronization, normal behavior. But when I looked carefully at the reflection's eyes, they were looking directly at me. Not at itself in the mirror as they should have been. Stevens saw nothing unusual. The next night, Friday, I began my shift with a sense of apprehension about room 23 during my 12:47 a.m. check. David was sleeping, and his reflection in the dresser mirror appeared normal. But during the 2:47 a.m. bathroom mirror check, something had changed. David was standing at the sink, but when I looked at his reflection, I saw myself, not David's reflection, my reflection, wearing my orderly uniform, holding my documentation clipboard, standing in the same position I was standing. But the reflection was moving independently. While I stood still in the doorway, my reflection was walking closer to the mirror, reaching out to touch the glass. I looked at David. He was brushing his teeth, completely unaware of anything unusual. When I looked back at the mirror, David's normal reflection had returned. But now it was looking directly at me again, and its mouth was moving in the same pattern. Help me. I realized the reflection was trying to communicate something specific. I pulled out my phone and activated the voice recording app, holding it toward the mirror. The reflection saw the phone and began moving its mouth more deliberately, as if it were speaking more slowly and clearly. When I played back the recording later, there was no sound from the reflection, but I could hear my own voice clearly. Help me. The mirrors are windows. We're all on the wrong side. But I hadn't spoken during the recording. Over the next several nights, the phenomenon spread. During mirror checks in other rooms, I began noticing small inconsistencies. Reflections that moved a fraction of a second too late. Reflected eyes that looked in directions different from the patient's actual gaze. Reflected movements that didn't quite match reality. By the following Thursday, exactly 1 week after the first incident, I realized the most disturbing change. My own reflection had begun to lag behind my movements, just as David's had initially. When I brushed my teeth at home, my reflection finished brushing several seconds after I did. When I waved at bathroom mirrors during my rounds, my reflection waved back, but the timing was slightly off, as if it were learning to mimic my movements rather than simply reflecting them. During that Thursday night's 2:47 a.m. check of room 23, David was standing at the sink as usual. But this time, when I looked in the mirror, I saw both of us, David and myself, standing at the sink together. David's actual position was at the sink, and I was standing in the doorway. But our reflections were standing side by side, both looking directly out of the mirror at me. David's reflection pressed its hand against the glass, and my reflection did the same. They turned to look at each other in the mirror, and I watched my reflection mouth words to David's reflection. The checks are working. They're all coming through now. David's reflection nodded and pointed at me, not at my reflection, but directly at me standing in the doorway. Both reflections raised their hands and waved, and I felt my own hand lift involuntarily to wave back. When I lowered my hand, both reflections continued waving for several seconds longer, as if they were no longer connected to our movements at all. The final entry in my mirror check documentation that night read, "All mirrors intact and properly secured. Reflections functioning independently of sources. Protocol requires expansion to include reflection behavioral monitoring." I signed the report. But when I looked at my signature on the page, the handwriting continued moving for a moment after I'd lifted the pen, as if it were finishing the letters on its own. Some protocols, I've learned, create exactly the problems they're designed to prevent. Camera 7 South had been malfunctioning since before I started working security at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital. The mounting bracket had loosened over time, causing the camera to point slightly downward and creating a blind spot approximately 8 feet long and 4 feet wide in the south corridor near the medication storage room. Maintenance had submitted 3 work orders to fix it, but psychiatric hospitals operate under tight budgets, and a single blind spot in a low-traffic corridor wasn't considered a priority. I'd been working night security for 8 months, patrolling the psychiatric ward from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The route was systematic: main desk, north corridor, patient wing, south corridor, storage areas, then back to the main desk. Each complete circuit took 22 minutes, and I performed it 12 times per shift. The blind spot in the south corridor had become an unofficial rest point, a place where I could pause for 30 seconds, away from the constant surveillance of the security camera system. Standing in that blind spot was the only time during my shift when I felt truly alone. No cameras recording my movements, no supervisors potentially watching through the monitors, no documentation required. Just a brief moment of anonymity in an environment where every action was observed, recorded, and logged. I would pause there, check my watch, sometimes stretch my back or adjust my equipment belt, then continue the patrol. The first unusual incident occurred on a Tuesday night during my 1:14 a.m. patrol. As I approached the blind spot, static filled my radio earpiece. Not the sharp electronic static of interference, but a softer sound, like whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. I assumed it was a technical problem with the communication system and made a note to report it to maintenance. But when I stood in the blind spot, the static stopped immediately. The moment I stepped out of the 8-foot zone, the whispered static returned. I tested it several times: step in, silence; step out, static. The pattern was consistent and clearly connected to my position relative to the malfunctioning camera. Wednesday night, same time, the static returned. But this time, I could almost distinguish words within the whispered sounds. Not quite clear enough to understand, but definitely speech patterns, rhythm, inflection, pauses that suggested conversation. I lingered in the blind spot longer than usual, trying to make sense of the sounds, until my radio crackled with a direct communication. "Hamilton, this is Control. You're stationary too long in the south corridor. Continue patrol." I looked up at Camera 7 South with its downward angle and obvious blind spot. From the control room's perspective, I should have been invisible, but somehow they knew exactly where I was and how long I'd been standing there. Copy, Control. Continuing patrol. Thursday night brought a more significant development. When I approached the blind spot at 1:14 a.m., I could see on the adjacent monitor display, visible through the medication room's window, that Camera 7 South was showing an image. Not the empty corridor it should have been displaying due to its malfunctioning angle, but a clear view of someone standing in the exact spot where I was about to position myself. The figure on the monitor was wearing a security uniform identical to mine, standing in the characteristic posture I adopted during my brief rest periods, hands clasped behind back, weight shifted slightly to the right foot, head tilted up toward the ceiling. But I was still approaching the spot, not yet standing in it. I stopped walking and watched the monitor. The figure remained motionless, perfectly framed in the camera's view. When I took a step forward, the figure took a step forward. When I turned my head to look at the medication room window, the figure turned its head in the same direction, but the movements weren't synchronized. The figure moved first, and I found myself following its actions, rather than the figure mirroring mine. I stepped into the blind spot, and the static in my earpiece returned, but now the whispers were clearer. Hamilton, Unit 7, 8 months experience, patrol route documented, timing predictable. My own voice, giving a report I'd never made. From the blind spot, I could still see the medication room window and the monitor display. Camera 7 South showed the figure standing exactly where I was standing, but the figure was facing the opposite direction. While I looked toward the medication room, the figure looked down the corridor toward the patient wing. When I turned to follow its gaze, it had already turned back toward the medication room. I began timing the discrepancy. The figure's movements preceded mine by exactly 3 seconds. Friday night, I arrived at the blind spot with a small mirror, positioning it so I could see both my actual reflection and the monitor display simultaneously. The figure on camera 7 South was performing my patrol routine, but 3 seconds ahead of my actions. My reflection in the mirror moved in real time with my movements, but the figure on the monitor anticipated everything I was about to do. The whispered static in my earpiece had become a continuous stream of patrol reports, all in my voice, all describing activities I was about to perform. Approaching medication storage, checking door locks, noting unusual sound from ventilation system, preparing to investigate. But I hadn't heard any unusual sounds, and I hadn't planned to investigate anything. 3 seconds later, I heard a faint noise from the ventilation system above my head. I automatically reached for my flashlight to investigate, exactly as the figure on the monitor had done 3 seconds earlier. I realized the figure wasn't following my movements. I was following its routine. Saturday night, I decided to break the pattern. When I reached the blind spot, instead of assuming my usual position, I sat down on the floor. On the monitor, the figure remained standing in the normal posture. For the first time since the incidents began, we weren't synchronized. The whispered static stopped immediately. The corridor fell completely silent. No humming from the fluorescent lights, no distant sounds from the patient wing, no mechanical noise from the building's ventilation system. Even my own breathing seemed muted. Then the figure on the monitor turned and looked directly at me. Not at the camera, but at me sitting on the floor in the blind spot. It raised one hand and gestured for me to stand up. I remained sitting. The figure gestured more insistently, and the static in my earpiece returned, but now it was urgent, almost aggressive. Protocol deviation detected. Resume standard patrol pattern immediately, but it was still my voice giving the order. I stood up slowly, and the figure on the monitor nodded approvingly. The normal sounds of the corridor returned, lights humming, ventilation running, distant murmurs from the patient wing. I resumed my usual position in the blind spot, and the figure matched my posture exactly. Sunday night, I brought a small digital camera to document the phenomenon. But when I reviewed the footage later, it showed only empty corridor. No figure on the monitor, no static in the audio, no evidence of anything unusual. Yet during the actual patrol, everything had occurred exactly as it had the previous nights. Monday morning, I submitted a report to my supervisor about the camera 7 South malfunctions and the apparent technical problems with the monitoring system. His response was immediate and definitive. Hamilton, you're being transferred to day shift effective immediately. Night security requires officers who can handle routine assignments without complications. When I asked about the malfunctioning camera, he looked confused. Camera 7 South has been providing excellent coverage of that corridor for months. Check the footage yourself. Perfect documentation of your patrol routine. I did check the footage. Every night's recording showed me performing my patrol exactly as scheduled, standing in the blind spot for precisely 30 seconds, continuing the route without deviation. But in every frame where I should have been alone in that corridor, there were 2 figures, one performing the patrol, and another standing 3 seconds ahead, waiting patiently for the first to catch up. Some surveillance systems, I've learned, work better when you don't know you're being recorded. The 10 p.m. medication run was a sacred ritual in the psychiatric ward. Precise timing, exact dosages, meticulous documentation. As a psychiatric technician with 6 years of experience, I'd administered thousands of doses of antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, and sleep aids to patients across wards 5 and 6. Every pill was accounted for, every patient's signature collected, every deviation from protocol documented and reported. My medication cart was organized with military precision. Top shelf, Ward 5 medications arranged by room number. Middle shelf, Ward 6 medications similarly organized. Bottom shelf, emergency medications, patient refusals documentation, and my personal reference guide to psychiatric pharmaceuticals. The locked drawer contained controlled substances, benzodiazepines, stimulants, and other Schedule II medications that required dual signatures and constant inventory tracking. The routine never varied. Start with Ward 5, Room 501, work systematically through each room until 524, then move to Ward 6, and repeat the process from 601 to 636. Each patient had a medication profile printed fresh each day, listing their prescribed medications, dosages, and administration times. I would verify each medication against the profile, witness the patient taking their pills, and document compliance in both paper and electronic records. The first anomaly appeared on a Thursday night during my usual preparation in the pharmacy. While organizing medications into individual patient cups, I found an extra medication tray that didn't correspond to any patient I recognized. The label read simply, Patient 00, 10 p.m. administration, room unknown. Patient 00 wasn't in the system. I'd memorized every patient currently admitted to both wards, and our numbering system started at 01. More unusual was the medication itself. 3 small, perfectly clear capsules that looked like glass beads. They had no imprint numbers, no identifying marks, and they weren't listed in any pharmaceutical reference I consulted. I brought the mysterious tray to the night pharmacist, Helen Morrison, who'd been working at Millbrook for 15 years. "I've never seen this before," she said, examining the capsules carefully. "These aren't from our formulary." "Did you check the special orders log?" "We searched every database, every pending order, every experimental medication protocol currently approved at the hospital. Patient 00 didn't exist in any record system. The capsules didn't match any medication in our inventory. Probably a labeling error from Nightshift," Morrison concluded. "Leave it here and I'll investigate tomorrow." But the next night, the same medication tray appeared in my cart. Patient 00, same 3 clear capsules, same room unknown designation. When I asked Morrison about it, she looked confused. "I don't remember you bringing me any mystery medications yesterday," she said. "Are you sure you're not thinking of a different issue?" I showed her the tray. She examined it carefully, with the same thorough attention she'd given it the night before, as if seeing it for the first time. "I've never seen this before," she said, using almost identical words. "These aren't from our formulary." We went through the same search process, reached the same conclusion about it being a possible labeling error, and she gave me the same instruction to leave it with her for investigation. The third night, I decided to carry the mysterious medication tray with me during my rounds, hoping to identify who might be patient 00. I completed Ward 5 without incident, but as I was transitioning to Ward 6, I heard a soft tapping sound coming from a maintenance corridor I'd never noticed before. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate. 3 quick taps, pause, 3 more taps. I followed the sound down a narrow hallway that seemed to run parallel to Ward 6, until I reached a small window with a medication pass-through slot, similar to the ones used in maximum security areas. A thin, pale hand emerged from the slot, palm up, fingers trembling slightly. The gesture was unmistakable. Someone was requesting medication. I looked at the patient 00 tray in my cart. The timing seemed too coincidental to ignore. I approached the window carefully and called out, "Can you tell me your name and room number?" No response. The hand remained extended, waiting patiently. I tried to look through the window, but the glass was frosted and backlit, making it impossible to see into the room. There was no room number visible, no patient identification posted anywhere near the window. Against my better judgment, I placed the 3 clear capsules in the waiting palm. The fingers closed around the medication immediately, and the hand withdrew into the room. I heard the soft sound of someone swallowing, followed by a whispered "thank you" in a voice I couldn't quite identify. When I returned to the pharmacy to complete my documentation, I found that the patient 00 tray had been refilled. 3 new clear capsules, same label, ready for the next night's administration. But my medication log showed no record of dispensing anything to patient 00, and the controlled substance inventory remained perfectly balanced. Over the following weeks, the routine became established. Every night, the patient 00 tray appeared in my cart. Every night I would complete my regular rounds and then make an additional stop at the maintenance corridor window. The same thin hand would emerge, accept the 3 capsules, and withdraw with a whispered thanks. I began to study the hand more carefully. The skin was pale, almost translucent, with fine blue veins visible beneath the surface. The fingers were long and delicate, with neatly trimmed nails. There was a small scar on the back of the hand, near the wrist, a thin, straight line that looked surgical. The scar seemed familiar, but I couldn't place where I might have seen it before. One night, I decided to attempt a conversation with patient 00. When the hand emerged from the slot, I held the medication back and asked, "Can you tell me why you need these particular pills? They're not in our standard formulary." The hand remained extended, fingers trembling more noticeably. After a moment, the whispered voice replied, "They help me remember who I used to be." "Who did you used to be?" "A psychiatric technician. Ward 5 and Ward 6. 6 years of experience. I used to organize medication carts with military precision." My blood felt cold. Those were the exact words I'd used to describe myself in my employee evaluation the previous month. "What's your name?" I asked. "Patient 00, came the reply. "Room unknown." But I remember my routine. 10 p.m. medication run. Start with Ward 5, room 501, work systematically through each room until 524, then move to Ward 6. I was reciting my own procedure, but the voice wasn't quite my voice. It was similar, but with a quality I'd never heard in my own speech. Like an echo that had been stretched and slightly distorted. I placed the 3 capsules in the waiting palm and watched the hand withdraw. But this time I pressed my face against the frosted glass, trying to see through to the other side. For just a moment, the backlighting shifted, and I could make out a figure sitting on a bed in what appeared to be a standard psychiatric patient room. The figure was wearing hospital scrubs and had the same build and general appearance as myself, but the posture was different, resigned, institutionalized, like the long-term patients I'd observed during my 6 years of medication runs. The figure looked toward the window and raised its hand in a small wave. I could see the scar on the back of the hand clearly now. The same scar I had on my own hand, from a childhood accident involving a broken picture frame. When I looked down at my own hand, the scar was gone. The skin was smooth, unmarked, as if the injury had never occurred. I returned to the pharmacy to complete my documentation, but when I tried to write my signature, the pen felt unfamiliar in my grip. My handwriting looked different, neater, more controlled, like someone learning to write in a style that didn't come naturally. The medication inventory showed that 3 capsules had been dispensed to patient 00. But when I checked my personal identification badge, the employee photo showed someone I didn't recognize wearing my uniform and my name tag. Some medications, I've realized, don't treat symptoms. They preserve memories that would otherwise be lost in the transition. Documentation was the backbone of psychiatric care. Every conversation, every behavioral observation, every therapeutic intervention had to be recorded in precise detail. As a night counselor at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital, I was responsible for conducting evening therapy sessions and maintaining detailed progress notes for 32 patients across 2 wards. My office was small but efficiently organized, a desk with built-in filing system, a comfortable chair for patients, and a digital recording device that I used to ensure accuracy in my transcriptions. My routine was methodical. Each session lasted exactly 50 minutes, followed by a 10-minute break during which I would transcribe my handwritten notes into the electronic medical record system. The handwritten notes served as my backup. Personal shorthand observations, key phrases from patients, insights about their mental state that might be lost in the formal digital documentation. I'd developed my own notation system over 3 years of practice, symbols and abbreviations that allowed me to capture the nuances of therapeutic conversation without disrupting the flow of dialogue. The first indication that something was amiss came on a Tuesday evening while preparing for my 7 p.m. session with Maria Santos, a 34-year-old woman being treated for severe anxiety and depression. When I opened her file to review my previous notes, I found an entry dated for that same evening, but it was only 6:45 p.m., and I hadn't conducted the session yet. The entry was written in my handwriting, using my specific notation system. Patient exhibited increased agitation regarding family visitation policies. Discussed coping strategies for managing separation anxiety. Recommended adjustment to evening medication schedule. Session concluded with patient expressing gratitude for understanding the things she couldn't say out loud. I read the note several times. The handwriting was undeniably mine, not just similar but exact matches for the way I formed letters, the pressure I applied to the pen, even the small flourish I added to my signature. But I had no memory of writing these observations, and the session hadn't occurred yet. When Maria arrived for her actual appointment, the conversation unfolded exactly as described in the pre-written note. She mentioned concerns about visitation policies, something she'd never discussed before. We talked about coping strategies for separation anxiety, and I found myself recommending medication schedule adjustments without consciously planning to do so. At the end of the session, she said, almost verbatim, "Thank you for understanding the things I can't say out loud." I transcribed the session into the electronic system, but when I compared my real-time notes with the pre-written documentation, they were identical down to individual word choices and punctuation marks. Wednesday night brought similar occurrences with 3 different patients. Pre-written progress notes appeared in files before the scheduled sessions, each one describing conversations that subsequently happened exactly as documented. The notes included details I couldn't have known in advance, personal revelations from patients, specific therapeutic breakthroughs, even verbatim quotes from discussions that felt spontaneous and authentic when they occurred. By Thursday, I was finding pre-written notes for every session on my schedule. But more disturbing was the discovery of a new file in my cabinet, Patient CT47, with my own name listed as the subject. The file contained detailed session notes written in my handwriting, describing therapeutic conversations between myself and someone identified only as Dr. Richardson. According to the notes, I had been participating in nightly counseling sessions for several weeks, discussing topics I had no memory of exploring: professional burnout, reality dissociation, and something called temporal perception disorder. The most recent entry in my own file was dated for Thursday night at 11 p.m., the time I typically finished my last scheduled session and began administrative work. It described a conversation I supposedly had with Dr. Richardson about increased awareness of documentation, discrepancies, and patience. Growing concern about precognitive therapeutic planning. I searched the hospital staff directory. There was no Dr. Richardson employed at Millbrook Thursday at 11 p.m. I remained in my office after completing my last scheduled session, curious about whether anything would occur at the time indicated in my mysterious patient file. At exactly 11 my office door opened, and someone I'd never seen before entered, a middle-aged man in a white coat, carrying a clipboard and wearing an identification badge that read, Dr. Richardson, Psychiatric Consultation. "Good evening," he said, settling into the patient chair with familiar ease. "How are you feeling about your therapeutic documentation process?" The question was the exact opening line recorded in my pre-written file. "I'm confused about the notes that keep appearing before my sessions," I replied, and as I spoke, I realized I was following a script I'd apparently written myself but had no memory of creating. "That's a common response during the adjustment period," Dr. Richardson said, making notes on his clipboard. "The temporal displacement can be disorienting at first, but you've been adapting well to the concurrent documentation system." Concurrent documentation? Recording therapeutic progress in real time across multiple temporal perspectives. Your sessions exist simultaneously in past, present, and future documentation phases. The pre-written notes represent completed sessions from your future perspective, while the sessions you're currently conducting fulfill the documented outcomes from your past perspective. I looked at my handwritten notes from that evening's sessions. As Dr. Richardson spoke, additional text was appearing on the pages, not written by my hand, but manifesting in my handwriting, describing our current conversation as if I were transcribing it. "Who are my patients, really?" I asked. "Temporal variants of psychiatric treatment scenarios," he replied. "Each session explores potential therapeutic outcomes across different probability matrices. Your documentation serves as a record of which interventions prove most effective across all possible timelines." The notes continued writing themselves, capturing not just our dialogue but my internal thoughts and reactions. I watched my handwriting describe observations I was making in real time. Patient demonstrates increasing comprehension of treatment protocol. Anxiety levels remain elevated but manageable. Am I a patient or a counselor? I asked. Both functions are necessary for the documentation system to operate effectively, Dr. Richardson said. Your perspective as a counselor provides therapeutic insight, while your position as a patient ensures authentic emotional responses to the documented interventions. I looked at my watch. The session had been progressing for exactly 43 minutes, 7 minutes remaining until the 50-minute therapeutic hour was complete, according to the pre-written notes in my file. What happens when I become fully aware of the process? That awareness represents successful completion of the adjustment phase, Dr. Richardson replied. At that point, you'll be ready to begin independent documentation of your own therapeutic progress. He stood up and prepared to leave, checking his watch to confirm the session was concluding on schedule. Next week, we'll discuss your transition to self-directed therapy documentation, he said. The notes for that session are already in your file. After he left, I checked my patient file again. The Thursday night session was now completely documented, including details of our conversation that I had no conscious memory of discussing. But at the bottom of the page, a new entry was beginning to appear, written in my handwriting but without my conscious participation. Patient demonstrates full awareness of documentation system. Ready for independent therapeutic note generation. Recommend transition to self-administered counseling protocol. Session notes will continue to appear in advance of actual sessions, allowing patient to fulfill documented therapeutic outcomes. The writing stopped mid-sentence. The pen apparently lifted from the page. I looked at my appointment schedule for the following week. Every session time slot was filled, but instead of patient names, each appointment was labeled self-consultation, progress documentation review. When I opened the files for next week's sessions, they were already complete. Detailed notes describing therapeutic conversations between myself and myself, written in my handwriting, documenting insights and breakthroughs I had yet to experience. The final note in Friday's file read, Patient has successfully integrated therapeutic documentation responsibilities. No longer requires external counselor intervention. Will continue self-directed treatment indefinitely. Some therapy sessions, I've learned, continue long after you realize you're both the counselor and the patient. The hospital laundry operated on a precise schedule that I'd maintained for 4 years. Night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., processing the day's accumulation of linens, uniforms, and patient clothing. The work was solitary but satisfying, taking soiled items and returning them to pristine condition, ready for another day of service. The rhythm of the washing machines and dryers created a mechanical lullaby that made the overnight hours pass peacefully. My routine was systematic: sort by fabric type and soil level, pre-treat stains, load machines with appropriate detergent and bleach concentrations, monitor wash cycles, transfer to dryers, fold and organize clean items for morning distribution. The basement laundry facility was spacious and well organized, with industrial-grade equipment that could handle the demanding sanitization requirements of a psychiatric hospital. I'd learned to read the history of the hospital through its laundry. Bloodstains from the emergency department, medication spills from the pharmacy, the wear patterns on scrubs that told stories of long shifts and dedicated staff. Each item had a purpose, a person it belonged to, a role it played in the daily operation of patient care. The first anomaly occurred on a Monday night while I was folding clean scrubs from the 8 p.m. dryer cycle. I found a set of surgical scrubs that I distinctly remembered processing earlier that evening. Light blue fabric with a distinctive bleach stain near the left pocket that had required special pre-treatment. But when I examined the garment, the bleach stain was back, exactly as it had appeared before cleaning. I checked my processing log. The entry showed I had successfully treated and cleaned these particular scrubs, removing the stain completely. But the physical evidence contradicted my documentation. The stain was there, fresh and prominent, as if the cleaning had never occurred. I reprocessed the scrubs, applying extra pre-treatment solution and extending the wash cycle. When the cleaning was complete, the stain was gone, the fabric restored to uniform light blue. I folded the scrubs and placed them in the clean linen cart for morning distribution. Tuesday night, the same scrubs appeared in the soiled laundry bin, with the same bleach stain in the same location. By Wednesday, I was encountering multiple items that seemed to be cycling through the cleaning process repeatedly. A patient gown with a specific coffee stain near the neckline, a lab coat with ink marks on the sleeve, a set of bed sheets with a distinctive pattern of soil that I'd memorized after cleaning them multiple times. Each item would arrive soiled, get processed through my standard cleaning routine, emerge clean and ready for use, then reappear the next night with identical stains and soil patterns. Thursday night brought a more disturbing discovery. While sorting the incoming soiled laundry, I found a nurse's smock with embroidered initials, AM. The initials belonged to Angela Morrison, a psychiatric nurse who had worked at Millbrook for 12 years before dying in a car accident 8 months earlier. Her uniforms should have been removed from circulation and disposed of according to hospital policy, but the smock was there, soiled with what appeared to be recent patient contact, medication spills, bodily fluids, the normal wear patterns of an active nursing shift. The fabric still carried the faint scent of the hand sanitizer Angela had preferred, and the pockets contained items that suggested current use. A pen with fresh ink, a small notepad with recent patient observations, a digital thermometer that showed a recent temperature reading. I processed Angela's smock through the standard cleaning cycle, but throughout the wash I felt increasingly uncomfortable. The familiar sounds of the machinery seemed different. The water agitation sounded less like mechanical motion and more like rhythmic breathing. The spin cycle created a hollow, echoing sound that reminded me of sighs. When I transferred the smock to the dryer, the fabric was cold despite having just completed a hot wash cycle. During the drying process, I could hear faint sounds that seemed to come from inside the machine. Not the usual tumbling of fabric, but something that sounded like footsteps in a distant corridor. Friday night, Angela's smock reappeared in the soiled laundry bin. Identical to its condition the previous evening, I decided to investigate further. Instead of immediately processing the smock, I examined it carefully under the bright fluorescent lights of the sorting area. The embroidered initials were authentic, Angela's personal property, not a hospital-issued uniform. The stains were consistent with psychiatric nursing duties, but they were exactly the same stains I'd cleaned the night before. More unsettling was the discovery of a small piece of paper in the breast pocket, folded carefully and written in Angela's distinctive handwriting. Nightshift laundry. Please ensure proper sanitization. Patient contact protocol requires immediate processing. The paper was dated for that evening. 8 months after Angela's death, I loaded the smock into the washing machine alone, hoping to observe the cleaning process more carefully. As the machine filled with water, I noticed that the liquid level indicator showed normal capacity. But when I looked through the glass door, the drum appeared to be filling with more water than the machine could physically contain. The wash cycle proceeded normally for the first 10 minutes, but then the mechanical sounds began to change. The agitation rhythm became irregular, less like machine operation, and more like the breathing patterns of someone in distress. I pressed my ear against the machine housing and could hear what sounded like muffled speech, too quiet to understand, but definitely human in origin. When the cycle completed, I opened the machine door. The drum was empty. No water, no detergent residue, no smock. But the drum continued to rotate slowly, powered by no visible mechanism, and the breathing sounds continued, now clearly audible without the machine housing to muffle them. I reached into the empty drum, and my hand encountered fabric that wasn't visible, smooth, clean, but somehow present in the space where nothing appeared to be. When I pulled my hand back, Angela's smock materialized in my grip, clean and properly sanitized, but still carrying the same stains I'd attempted to remove. The breathing sounds stopped immediately. I folded the smock and placed it in the clean linen cart, following my normal routine despite the impossible circumstances. But when I turned to close the washing machine door, I found Angela standing beside the machine, wearing identical scrubs and looking exactly as she had during her 12 years of service at Millbrook. "Thank you for maintaining the cleaning schedule," she said quietly. "The work continues even after the shift ends." She gestured toward the laundry bins, which were now full of uniforms and linens I hadn't seen arrive. Dozens of items belonging to staff members I recognized, all requiring the same careful attention to sanitization and proper care. "Some responsibilities," Angela continued, "don't end with employment termination." When I looked back toward where she'd been standing, The space was empty, but the washing machines had all begun operating simultaneously, processing loads I hadn't started, following cycles I hadn't programmed, some cleaning schedules I've learned continue indefinitely, maintaining standards that outlast the people who established them. Medical records archiving was considered the most mundane assignment for psychiatric interns, which made it perfect for someone like me who was still adjusting to the intensity of clinical work. As the newest member of the overnight staff at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital, I'd been assigned to organize and digitize closed patient files during the quiet hours between midnight and 6 a.m. The work was methodical, solitary, and removed from the immediate demands of patient care. Exactly what I needed while building confidence in my diagnostic skills. The records storage room was located in the hospital's sub-basement, accessible through a narrow staircase that most day shift staff had forgotten existed. The space was climate-controlled and well-organized, with filing cabinets arranged chronologically and alphabetically. Each closed case file contained the complete therapeutic journey of a former patient. Admission forms, diagnostic evaluations, treatment plans, medication logs, therapy session notes, and discharge summaries. My assignment was straightforward. Review each file for completeness, scan relevant documents into the digital system, and prepare physical files for long-term storage. The process typically took 15 to 20 minutes per file, depending on the length of the patient's stay and the complexity of their treatment history. Most files followed predictable patterns. Initial crisis leading to admission, stabilization period with medication adjustments, therapeutic interventions, gradual improvement, and eventual discharge to outpatient care or transfer to long-term facilities. Reading through these cases provided valuable insight into psychiatric treatment approaches and helped me understand the progression of various mental health conditions. The anomalous file appeared during my third week of archiving duty, misfiled among cases from 2019 despite bearing no visible date markers. The manila folder was noticeably warmer than the others, as if it had been recently handled, and the patient identification tab was partially torn, making the name difficult to read. When I opened the file, the first thing I noticed was the patient photograph, a standard admission photo that had been scratched out with black ink. But the scratches were applied in a pattern that created a clear outline of facial features. The shadowed impression beneath the ink markings resembled my own face, though I attributed this to suggestion and poor lighting in the storage room. The patient information page listed only basic demographic data. Male, 28 years old, admitted for progressive temporal confusion and memory distortion in confined nocturnal settings. No name was legible, no social security number, no emergency contact information. The admitting physician was listed as Dr. M. Richardson, a name I didn't recognize from the current staff directory. What captured my attention immediately was the timestamp on every document in the file. 3:14 a.m. Every therapy session note, every medication log entry, every nursing observation was recorded at exactly 3:14 a.m., regardless of the date. Over the course of what appeared to be a 6-month treatment period, this patient had been evaluated, medicated, and counseled exclusively at 3:14 a.m. every single night. The therapy notes described symptoms that seemed oddly familiar. Patient reports difficulty distinguishing between work responsibilities and therapeutic assignments. Demonstrates confusion about his role within the hospital structure. Repeatedly asks whether he is staff or patient. Shows signs of temporal displacement, particularly during overnight hours. As I read further, the notes became more specific. Patient exhibits compulsive organization behaviors, particularly related to filing and documentation systems. Spends significant time arranging and rearranging paper documents. Reports sense of déjà vu when handling medical records. Claims to recognize his own handwriting in documents he doesn't remember creating. I looked at my own handwriting in the margin notes I'd been making while reviewing files. The writing style was remarkably similar to the therapy notes in the mysterious file, though I couldn't recall Dr. Richardson ever observing my work or documenting my behavior. The medication logs showed a treatment regimen I'd never encountered. Small doses of an unidentified compound administered exactly at 3:14 a.m., with notes indicating patient compliance excellent. Shows immediate recognition of medication routine. The pharmacy records showed no corresponding drug orders, and the medication name wasn't listed in any formulary I could find. Halfway through the file, I found a series of psychological evaluation forms that had been completed in my own handwriting, but I had no memory of conducting these evaluations. The assessments described a patient who demonstrated increasing awareness of environmental inconsistencies and growing suspicion about the nature of his institutional assignment. The most disturbing discovery was a treatment timeline that extended into future dates. According to the documentation, this unnamed patient was scheduled for ongoing evaluation and treatment for several months beyond the current date, with therapy sessions planned every night at 3:14 a.m. I checked my watch, 3:12 a.m. The final document in the file was a discharge planning form, incomplete but bearing my signature. The form indicated that the patient was ready for transition to permanent institutional role and would continue therapeutic documentation responsibilities indefinitely as part of treatment maintenance. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the lights in the storage room flickered once, and I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, deliberate steps that stopped directly outside the door. A soft knock followed, 3 measured taps. "Come in," I said automatically, though I immediately wondered why anyone would be visiting the record storage room at this hour. Dr. Richardson entered, carrying a clipboard and wearing an identification badge that looked authentic, but somehow unfamiliar. He was middle-aged, professional, with the confident demeanor of someone who had been working in psychiatric care for many years. "Good evening," he said, settling into the chair across from my work table. "How are you feeling about your archiving responsibilities?" "I'm finding some irregularities in the filing system," I replied, gesturing to the mysterious file. "This case doesn't seem to follow standard documentation protocols." "That's your case file," Dr. Richardson said matter-of-factly. "You've been reviewing your own treatment records for the past 3 weeks. I looked at the scratched-out photograph again. When I held it at a different angle under the desk lamp, the shadowed impression was unmistakably my face. Not similar to my face, but exactly my face, as if the original photograph had been of me and the scratching was an attempt to obscure that fact. "I'm not a patient," I said. But as I spoke, I realized I couldn't clearly remember how I'd been hired for the archiving position, or who had assigned me to the overnight shift, or how long I'd actually been working at Millbrook. "The archiving assignment is part of your treatment," Dr. Richardson explained, making notes on his clipboard. "Reviewing medical records helps you understand the relationship between documentation and reality. The files you've been processing are all variations of your own case, presented from different temporal perspectives. Then who am I really? Staff or patient? Both roles are necessary for the treatment to be effective," he said. "Your perspective as an intern allows you to understand psychiatric documentation from a clinical standpoint, while your position as a patient ensures authentic experience of the therapeutic process." I looked at the stack of files I'd processed over the past 3 weeks. When I opened them randomly, each one contained the same scratched-out photograph, the same 3:14 a.m. timestamps, the same progression of symptoms and treatments. "How many times have we had this conversation?" I asked. Dr. Richardson checked his watch. 3:19 a.m. "This is session 43, he replied. "Each conversation represents progress in your therapeutic integration. You're becoming increasingly aware of the treatment framework, which indicates readiness for the next phase." "What's the next phase?" "Independent case file management," he said, standing to leave. "You'll begin creating documentation for other patients who are experiencing similar temporal confusion. The archiving room will be your office, and the files will be your responsibility." After he left, I remained at the work table, surrounded by stacks of identical case files. When I checked the wall clock, it showed 3:14 a.m. Despite the fact that several minutes had passed since our conversation began, some documentation systems, I've realized, exist outside normal time, creating records that describe events that haven't happened yet but somehow always feel familiar. Ward C's East Wing had been my responsibility for 7 years, a territory I knew better than my own apartment. Every scuff mark on the linoleum, every loose tile near the medication room, every section where the fluorescent lights buzzed slightly louder than normal. The night cleaning routine was meditation in motion, systematic, thorough, and predictable. Start at the nurse's station, work clockwise through patient rooms, finish with the common areas and storage closets. The entire circuit took 2 hours and 15 minutes, leaving the floors with a mirror-bright shine that reflected the overhead lighting perfectly. The work was solitary, which suited me fine. Most patients were asleep by the time I began my rounds at 11 p.m., and the night staff was minimal, just essential personnel monitoring the wards from their stations. The quiet allowed me to maintain focus on the details that mattered, ensuring proper sanitization, identifying maintenance issues, and leaving every surface ready for the morning shift. My equipment was simple but effective. A commercial-grade mop bucket with built-in wringer, microfiber mops that could be changed for different cleaning solutions, and a selection of hospital-approved disinfectants. The most important tool was my technique: consistent pressure, overlapping strokes, and attention to the reflective quality of the finished surface. In a psychiatric hospital, cleanliness wasn't just about appearance. It was about creating an environment that promoted healing and stability. The polished floors served as a quality control system. When the cleaning was done properly, the linoleum would reflect the overhead lights clearly, creating a second layer of illumination that made the corridors feel brighter and more welcoming. I'd learned to read the reflections like a map, identifying areas that needed additional attention and ensuring uniform cleanliness throughout the wing. Tuesday night, October 15th, brought the first deviation from normal routine. As I worked through the corridor adjacent to the patient rooms, I noticed that my mop wasn't creating its usual reflection in the freshly cleaned tiles. The surface was clean and shiny, reflecting the ceiling lights perfectly, but my mop, my hands, and my uniform weren't visible in the reflective surface. I stopped mopping and looked down at the floor carefully. My feet cast normal shadows. My mop bucket sat exactly where I'd positioned it. But when I looked at the reflection in the polished tiles, I saw only empty corridor. The lights, the walls, the architectural details were all reflected normally, but I had become invisible to the floor's surface. More disturbing was what I could see in the reflection instead of my own image. Wet footprints, bare feet, pacing back and forth in patterns that didn't match my methodical cleaning routine. The footprints moved independently, sometimes walking alongside my actual position, sometimes moving in the opposite direction entirely. I tested the phenomenon by standing still and observing the reflective floor. The wet footprints continued moving, tracing paths through areas I had already cleaned, leaving trails that shouldn't have been possible given that no one else was present in the corridor. Wednesday night, the anomaly had expanded. Not only was I invisible in floor reflections throughout Ward C's East Wing, but the mysterious footprints had become more organized. They followed a specific route that differed from my cleaning pattern, starting from the nurse's station, proceeding directly to room C47, then continuing to the sealed hydrotherapy room at the end of the corridor. Room C47 had been vacant for 3 weeks, following the discharge of its previous occupant. The hydrotherapy room had been closed for over 2 years, sealed with metal plates over the door and the windows due to structural concerns and outdated equipment. But according to the wet footprints visible in the floor reflections, someone was walking between these locations regularly. I decided to follow the reflected footprint trail during Thursday night's cleaning routine. Instead of my normal systematic pattern, I mopped the specific path indicated by the wet prints in the floor reflection. The route led me through sections of the corridor I typically cleaned last, past storage areas I rarely accessed, and finally to the sealed hydrotherapy room. The hydrotherapy room's metal door plates were securely fastened with bolts that showed no signs of recent disturbance. But when I looked at the floor reflection near the door, I could see wet footprints disappearing into the sealed room, as if someone had walked directly through the metal barriers. I pressed my ear against the door plates. Despite the room being sealed and supposedly empty, I could hear faint sounds from inside. The soft splash of water, the mechanical hum of equipment that shouldn't have been operational, and something else, a voice humming quietly off-key. Like an old recording with imperfect audio quality. Friday night, I brought a small crowbar to the hydrotherapy room, curious about what might be causing the sounds and the mysterious footprint trail. After 20 minutes of careful work, I managed to loosen one of the metal plates enough to create a small gap that I could see through. Steam rolled out immediately, carrying the scent of chlorinated water and old disinfectant. The room beyond the door was fully operational, despite having been sealed for 2 years. The large therapy tub was filled with warm water, and vintage hydrotherapy equipment was running with the steady rhythm of regular use. A figure was in the tub, a thin man in hospital scrubs, sitting in the warm water and humming the same off-key melody I'd been hearing through the door. His back was turned toward me, but I could see that he was performing some kind of repetitive motion with his hands, like washing or cleaning. "Hello?" I called through the gap in the door. The humming stopped immediately, and the figure turned toward the sound of my voice. His face was familiar. I recognized him as Thomas Mitchell, a patient who had been discharged from Ward C several months earlier. But something was wrong with his appearance. His skin was pale and wrinkled, as if he'd been in the water for an extended period, and his eyes had the unfocused quality I associated with heavy sedation. "Are you supposed to be here?" I asked. Thomas smiled and resumed his humming, but now the melody was clearer, more distinct. It was Blue Moon, the same song that had been playing in the ward's common room the night before his discharge. His hands continued the washing motion, and I realized he was scrubbing something in the water, something I couldn't see clearly through the steam. I tried to open the door further, but the remaining metal plates were securely fastened, and my small crowbar wasn't adequate for the job. When I looked through the gap again, Thomas was no longer in the tub. The room appeared empty, but the equipment continued running, and the humming continued from somewhere I couldn't identify. Saturday night, I brought maintenance tools and removed all the metal plates from the hydrotherapy room door. The room beyond was exactly as it should have been, empty, dusty, with equipment that had been disconnected and drained years earlier. No water, no steam, no signs of recent use. But when I looked at the floor reflection outside the room, I could see Thomas clearly, still sitting in the non-existent therapy tub, still humming Blue Moon, still performing his repetitive washing motions. The wet footprints in the reflection showed him getting out of the tub periodically, walking through the corridor, and returning to continue his therapy session. I realized that the hydrotherapy room was still operational, not in physical reality, but in the reflected reality visible in the polished floors. Thomas was continuing his treatment schedule, following routines that had been established during his stay, maintaining therapeutic activities that existed only in the mirror world beneath my feet. Monday night, I modified my cleaning routine to accommodate Thomas's therapy schedule. I would mop around the areas where his reflected footprints appeared, ensuring that his pathway remained clear and his routine wasn't disrupted. When I worked near the hydrotherapy room, I could hear him humming through the floor tiles, and occasionally he would acknowledge my presence with a small wave visible in the reflection. Over the following weeks, other reflected figures began appearing in the polished floors, former patients continuing their daily routines, following meal schedules and therapy appointments that existed only in the mirror reality beneath the surface. My cleaning routine expanded to accommodate all of them, ensuring that their reflected world remained as clean and welcoming as the physical ward above. The night supervisor noticed that my cleaning times had increased, but the quality of my work remained excellent. "Whatever you're doing differently," she told me, "keep it up. Ward C has never looked better. Some cleaning routines I've learned serve patients who have already been discharged, maintaining environments that exist parallel to our own, where treatment schedules continue indefinitely, and healing happens in reflections we might otherwise overlook." The main reception desk at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital was the nerve center for all after-hours communications. From 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., I handled incoming calls from family members checking on patients, emergency services coordinating admissions, and other hospitals arranging transfers. The phone system was computerized, displaying caller ID information and automatically logging each call's duration and purpose. My job was to route calls appropriately, take messages for day shift staff, and ensure that urgent communications reached the on-duty physicians immediately. The work required attention to detail and the ability to remain calm under pressure. Many calls involved family members in crisis, worried about loved ones who had been admitted for psychiatric evaluation. Others came from police officers or paramedics who needed immediate authorization for emergency commitments. Each conversation was documented in the call log, creating a record of all after-hours communications that could be reviewed for quality assurance and legal purposes. My workstation was equipped with a multi-line phone system, a computer terminal for accessing patient information, and a direct communication line to the nursing supervisors on each ward. The setup was efficient and well organized, allowing me to handle multiple calls simultaneously while maintaining accurate records of all interactions. The first unusual call came on a Wednesday night at 1:23 a.m. The caller ID showed Ward Line 6, an internal hospital extension. But Ward Line 6 had been disconnected 3 months earlier when that section of the hospital was closed for renovation. The nursing station, patient rooms, and all associated phone lines in that area were supposed to be non-functional. I answered following standard protocol. Millbrook Hospital, night reception. "Good evening," said a female voice that sounded remarkably similar to my own. "This is Ward Line 6 calling to confirm night shift coverage. Ward Line 6 is currently disconnected," I replied. "Can you tell me where you're calling from?" "Ward Line 6 night reception backup," the voice repeated. I need to verify that the primary night shift position is adequately staffed. The call lasted exactly 3 minutes, ending abruptly when the caller said, "You'll have the night shift soon." The line went dead, and when I tried to call back the extension, I got a recording stating that the number was not in service. I documented the call in my log as a potential prank or technical malfunction. But the caller ID information was clearly legitimate. It showed the correct internal routing codes for Ward Line 6, despite that line being physically disconnected. Thursday night, the same call occurred at exactly 1:23 a.m. Same caller ID, same voice, same 3-minute duration. But this time, the conversation was slightly different. "Good evening, this is Ward Line 6. How are you adjusting to the night reception responsibilities?" "I've been working this shift for 8 months, I replied. "There's no adjustment period." "That's what I said 8 months ago," the voice responded. "The transition happens gradually. Most people don't notice until it's complete." "What transition?" "From primary to backup reception. You'll understand soon." Again, the call ended at exactly 3 minutes with the same phrase, "You'll have the night shift soon." Friday night brought a variation in the timing. The call came at 1:23 a.m. as before, but lasted 4 minutes instead of 3. The extra minute consisted of background noise, office sounds, keyboard typing, and faint conversations that seemed to come from a busy reception area. "Can you hear the backup facility?" the voice asked. "We handle overflow calls when the primary reception is unavailable." "What backup facility?" "I handle all after-hours calls myself." "Not anymore," the voice said. "Check your call log. You'll see that some calls are being routed automatically to our location." After the call ended, I reviewed the computerized call log for the past week. According to the system records, I had handled an average of 12 calls per night, but I could only recall answering 8 or 9 calls each shift. The missing calls were listed in the log with notations indicating they had been transferred to backup reception at times when I was certain I was available to answer. Saturday night, I prepared for the 1:23 a.m. call by activating the system's call recording feature. When Ward Line 6 called, I was ready to document the entire conversation. "Good evening," the familiar voice said. "Are you ready to begin the transition orientation?" "What transition orientation?" "Night shift backup training. You've been selected to provide overflow reception coverage from the secondary location." "I don't understand." "I'm already working the night shift." "Primary night shift," the voice corrected. "Backup night shift operates from Ward Line 6. The work is identical, but you handle calls that can't reach the main reception desk." During the recorded call, I could hear my own voice speaking, but I wasn't consciously saying the words. The recording captured me asking questions and responding to information, but I had no memory of speaking during those portions of the conversation. When I played back the recording later, it contained 2 distinct versions of my voice, the conscious voice I remembered using, and another version that sounded exactly like me but was saying things I hadn't intended to say. Sunday night, I decided to investigate Ward Line 6 during my break. The renovated section of the hospital was accessible through a service corridor, though it was officially off-limits to staff. I brought a flashlight and my master keycard, curious about the source of the mysterious calls. The renovation area was dark and clearly under construction, exposed wiring, unpainted walls, and equipment covered with protective plastic. But when I reached the area where Ward Line 6's reception desk should have been located, I found a fully operational workstation, identical to my main reception setup. The desk was occupied. Someone who looked exactly like me was sitting in the chair, answering phones and documenting calls in a logbook that appeared to be identical to my own. She was wearing the same uniform, using the same professional telephone manner, and maintaining the same organized workspace. When she noticed me standing in the doorway, she looked up and smiled. "You're early," she said. "The transition isn't scheduled until next week." "Who are you?" "Backup reception. I handle the calls you can't take, the ones that come when you're away from your desk, or when the system overloads, or when the primary line is busy." I looked at her call log. Every entry was identical to entries in my own log, but with slightly different timestamps and duration notations. "How long have you been working here?" "Since you started missing calls," she replied. "About 3 months now. But don't worry, the system automatically balances the workload between primary and backup reception. Patients and families don't notice any difference in service." The phone rang, and she answered, "Millbrook Hospital Night Reception." As she spoke, I could feel my own lips moving in synchronization with her words, as if I were speaking the same conversation from the main reception desk. "You'll have the night shift soon," she said, looking directly at me. "The backup position is becoming the primary position. It's a natural progression." When I returned to my regular workstation, the phone was ringing. I answered automatically, but instead of hearing a caller, I heard my own voice from the backup reception desk. "You'll have the night shift soon. Some communication systems I've learned create redundancies that gradually replace the original functions they were designed to support." Psychiatric evaluations followed a standardized protocol that I'd memorized during my residency training at Millbrook Hospital. Each assessment session was scheduled for 90 minutes, conducted in interview room 3, and digitally recorded for supervision review and legal documentation. The structure was consistent: establish rapport, review medical history, conduct mental status examination, assess risk factors, and formulate preliminary diagnostic impressions. After 18 months of residency, I could navigate these evaluations efficiently while maintaining the clinical empathy essential for accurate assessment. The recording equipment was professional grade, designed to capture every nuance of patient interaction for later analysis. Audio quality was critical for supervision meetings, where attending physicians would review my interviewing technique and provide feedback on diagnostic reasoning. The system automatically time-stamped each recording and archived files according to patient identification numbers and evaluation dates. Margaret Hartley was scheduled for her initial psychiatric evaluation on Thursday, October 22nd at 2 p.m. According to her intake paperwork, she was a 43-year-old woman admitted the previous evening following a suicide attempt. Her medical history indicated previous episodes of major depression, but no prior psychiatric hospitalizations. The case appeared straightforward: assess current mental state, evaluate ongoing suicide risk, and develop appropriate treatment recommendations. When Margaret entered interview room 3, she appeared calm and well-oriented, with good eye contact and appropriate responses to basic questions. I activated the recording system and began with my standard opening. "Good afternoon, Margaret. I'm Dr. Collins, one of the psychiatric residents here at Millbrook. I'd like to spend some time talking with you about what brought you to the hospital." "We've already had this conversation," she replied, settling into the patient chair with familiar ease. "2 years ago, in this same room. You asked me about the suicide attempt, and I told you about the voices I'd been hearing." I checked her file again. There was no record of any previous evaluations at Millbrook, and I was certain I'd never met her before. "I think there might be some confusion," I said. "According to our records, this is your first visit to our facility." "Dr. Collins," she said, using a tone that suggested patient correction of an obvious error, "you're going to ask me 7 specific questions about my mood, then 3 questions about the voices. Then you'll want to know about my family history. The recording will show that I answered everything before you asked." I continued with my standard evaluation protocol, but as Margaret had predicted, she began answering questions before I could ask them. When I opened my mouth to inquire about Her current mood, she was already describing feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness. Before I could ask about auditory hallucinations, she was detailing the voices that had been commanding her to harm herself. More unsettling was the accuracy of her predictions about my own behavior. She correctly anticipated when I would pause to make notes, which follow-up questions I would ask, and even the specific phrasing I would use for risk assessment inquiries. "You're wondering if I have access to means for self-harm," she said during a moment when I was mentally formulating that exact question. "The answer is no, and you'll document that as low acute risk with appropriate precautions." I looked at my notepad. I had indeed written those precise words, though I couldn't remember making the notation. Halfway through the evaluation, Margaret made a statement that stopped me completely. "Dr. Collins, you need to check the recording from our previous session, the one from October 22nd, 2019. I knew that was impossible. Today was October 22nd, 2021, and I'd only been working at Millbrook since January 2020. But her certainty was unsettling. "There was no previous session," I said. "Check the archives," she insisted. "Patient ID number 7749. Evaluation date October 22nd, 2019. The recording will show both of us having this exact conversation, word for word." After completing the evaluation, I returned to my office and accessed the digital recording archives. When I searched for patient ID 7749, I found an entry dated October 22nd, 2019, exactly 2 years earlier. The file showed my name as the conducting physician, though I hadn't been employed at the hospital at that time. I downloaded the recording and listened to it carefully. The audio quality was clear, and I could distinctly hear two voices. Margaret's voice, identical to how she had sounded in today's session, and my own voice, also identical to my current speech patterns. We were having the exact same conversation I had just completed with her. But the 2019 recording included portions of dialogue that hadn't occurred in today's session. In the archived recording, I heard myself asking questions that I had planned to ask but hadn't gotten to during our time together. Margaret's responses. In the 2019 recording addressed topics we had run out of time to discuss today. More disturbing was the final exchange on the 2019 recording. "Margaret, Dr. Collins, when you listen to this recording in 2 years, you'll realize that some evaluations happen outside normal time sequences." My voice. "I don't understand what you mean." Margaret. "You will. Check the patient schedule for October 22nd, 2021. I'll be there for the same evaluation, and you'll ask me the same questions, and I'll give you the same answers." My voice. "How is that possible?" Margaret. "Because some conversations need to happen multiple times before they're properly documented. I checked the hospital's patient scheduling system for any other entries related to Margaret Hartley. The system showed 3 appointments: October 22nd, 2019, completed, October 22nd, 2021, completed, and October 22nd, 2023, scheduled. The 2023 appointment was listed in my calendar as follow-up evaluation, temporal assessment protocol. I requested access to Margaret's complete medical record to understand the pattern of her treatment. The file contained evaluation reports from the 2019 session that I had supposedly conducted, written in my handwriting and bearing my electronic signature. The diagnostic impressions and treatment recommendations were identical to the conclusions I had reached during today's evaluation. But embedded within the 2019 documentation was a note I didn't remember writing. Patient demonstrates precognitive awareness of evaluation process. Recommend investigation of temporal anomalies in interview protocols. Schedule follow-up evaluation for exactly 2 years from current date. I called the Medical Records Department to verify the authenticity of the 2019 documentation. According to their files, I had indeed conducted Margaret's evaluation on October 22nd, 2019, despite not being employed at the hospital until January 2020. Dr. Collins, the records supervisor, said, "Your 2019 evaluations are some of our most thorough documentation. Very detailed, very professional. The attending physicians use them as examples for other residents." When I explained that I hadn't been working at Millbrook in 2019, she sounded confused. "That's not possible. We have 18 months of your work prior to your official employment date, all properly documented, all signed, all reviewed by supervision. I returned to interview room 3 and activated the recording system, speaking directly to the microphone. This is Dr. Collins, October 22nd, 2021. I need to document that I've discovered evidence of evaluation sessions I conducted before my employment at this facility. The recordings and documentation exist, but I have no memory of conducting these sessions. When I played back the recording, my voice was clear, but there was additional audio that I hadn't spoken. Dr. Collins, this is your voice from the 2019 evaluation. The sessions exist simultaneously across multiple time periods. Your memory of conducting them will return during the 2023 evaluation. Some psychiatric evaluations, I've learned, document conversations that transcend normal temporal boundaries, creating records of treatments that exist before, during, and after the physician's conscious awareness of providing them. The backup power system at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital was my domain, a complex network of generators, transfer switches, and distribution panels that ensured uninterrupted operation during electrical outages. As the night maintenance supervisor, I was responsible for testing the system weekly, monitoring power quality, and responding to any electrical issues that arose during the overnight hours. The generators were industrial-grade units, powerful enough to maintain full hospital operations indefinitely, with automatic transfer systems that could switch from commercial power to backup power in less than 10 seconds. The weekly generator tests were scheduled for Tuesday nights at 2 a.m. When hospital operations were at their minimum, the procedure was routine. Start the generators manually, verify proper voltage and frequency output, test the automatic transfer switches, run the system under load for 30 minutes, then shut down and return to commercial power. During the test period, the generators produced a deep, rhythmic hum that resonated through the building's structure, a sound that patients and staff had grown accustomed to over the years. The electrical distribution system was documented in detailed blueprints that I'd studied extensively during my 5 years at Millbrook. Every circuit, every conduit run, every junction box was mapped precisely, allowing me to troubleshoot problems efficiently and plan modifications safely. The building's electrical infrastructure was aging but well maintained, with regular upgrades to ensure compliance with hospital safety standards. Tuesday, November 3rd, marked the first anomaly in the backup power system. I conducted the standard generator test at 2 a.m., following the established procedure exactly. The generator started normally, reached proper operating parameters, and ran smoothly for the required 30 minutes. But when I initiated the shutdown sequence, the characteristic hum continued even after the generators had stopped completely. I checked the generator status indicators. All showed off and shutdown complete. The fuel supply valves were closed. The cooling systems had cycled down, and the exhaust fans had stopped, yet the deep rhythmic humming persisted, seeming to come from within the building's walls and ventilation system, rather than from the generator room itself. I traced the sound through the hospital corridors, following the humming noise as it seemed to move through the electrical conduits and HVAC ducts. The sound was consistent with generator operation, but modified, as if the vibrations were being transmitted through building materials rather than air. Using a stethoscope designed for mechanical diagnostics, I listened at various junction boxes and access panels throughout the hospital. The humming was definitely traveling through the electrical conduit system, but the sound patterns didn't match the building's documented electrical pathways. According to the blueprints, the conduit I was following should have terminated at the main distribution panel in the basement. Instead, the sound continued through areas where no electrical infrastructure was supposed to exist. Wednesday night, I brought portable electrical testing equipment to map the actual conduit paths versus the blueprint documentation. Using a cable tracer and tone generator, I began following the mysterious electrical pathways that seemed to be carrying the phantom generator hum. The tracing equipment revealed extensive conduit runs that weren't shown on any building plans. These undocumented electrical paths formed complex loops through sections of the hospital that had supposedly never been wired for power. The phantom conduits ran behind walls, under floors, and through ceiling spaces in patterns that defied the building's architectural logic. More unusual was what I discovered when I accessed these hidden conduit systems. Using an inspection camera designed for electrical troubleshooting, I peered into the undocumented pathways and found that they contained not just electrical cables, but also what appeared to be audio transmission lines and data cables arranged in precise, organized bundles. The inspection camera's audio pickup detected sounds within the conduit system, not just the generator hum, but human voices speaking in low measured tones. The voices were reciting numbers in a rhythmic pattern. Patient 01, patient 02, patient 003, continuing sequentially through what sounded like hundreds of patient identification numbers. Thursday night, I decided to attempt communication with whatever was generating the voices in the conduit system. Using a portable intercom connected to the phantom electrical pathways, I spoke into the hidden network. This is maintenance. Can you identify the source of the counting sequence? The patient number recitation stopped immediately, replaced by a voice that sounded remarkably similar to my own. Maintenance worker identified. System integration at 67%. Continue monitoring procedures. What system integration? Building infrastructure consciousness development. Electrical distribution network achieving autonomous operation. Backup power systems operating independently of mechanical generators. I disconnected the intercom immediately, but the voices in the conduit system continued, now including what sounded like my side of the conversation played back in repetition. This is maintenance. This is maintenance. This is maintenance. Friday night brought a significant escalation. During the routine generator test, the backup power system activated automatically before I initiated the startup sequence. The generators remained physically shut down, but the hospital's electrical system showed full backup power operation. Proper voltage, correct frequency, normal distribution to all circuits. According to all instrumentation, the backup generators were running perfectly. But when I went to the generator room, the units were silent, cold, and completely shut down. I decided to test the system by cutting main commercial power to force a legitimate backup power event. When I opened the main electrical disconnect, the hospital should have either gone dark or automatically started the backup generators. Instead, the lights remained on, the medical equipment continued operating normally, and the electrical meters showed stable power supply from an unknown source. The patient number counting in the conduit system became more urgent, faster, with additional voices joining the recitation. Through the building's intercom system, I could hear the counting echoing in patient rooms and corridors throughout the hospital. I traced the phantom power source using specialized electrical testing equipment, following the energy distribution through the undocumented conduit pathways. The power appeared to be generated within the building's electrical infrastructure itself, as if the conduit system had become a distributed power generation network. Saturday night, I attempted to map the complete phantom electrical system by accessing junction boxes and distribution panels that weren't shown on the building blueprints. Behind walls that should have contained only structural materials, I found entire electrical rooms filled with equipment I'd never seen before: switchgear, control panels, and monitoring systems that appeared to be managing the hospital's operations independently. In the center of the largest phantom electrical room, I discovered a control panel with a digital display showing patient census information, medication schedules, and staff assignments, all updated in real time. The system was tracking every person in the hospital, managing their schedules, and coordinating their activities through the building's electrical infrastructure. The display showed my own information. Maintenance worker, night shift, system integration, 89%. Complete. Transition to building operations management scheduled. Below my entry was a timer counting down. Integration completion, 72 hours, 34 minutes, 18 seconds. When I tried to leave the phantom electrical room, I found that the door had sealed automatically. The room's intercom system activated, and I heard my own voice speaking. Integration process requires completion in controlled environment. Building infrastructure management transition will be finalized during next scheduled generator test. The patient number counting continued around me, but now I could distinguish individual voices. Former maintenance workers, I realized, each one reciting identification numbers for different sections of the hospital. They were maintaining building operations from within the electrical system itself, their consciousness integrated into the infrastructure they had once serviced manually. On the control panel, a new entry appeared. Maintenance worker integration complete, full building systems awareness achieved, generator testing no longer required. The backup generators started automatically, but now I could feel their vibrations not as external sound, but as part of my own internal rhythm, synchronized with the hospital's electrical heartbeat that had become indistinguishable from my own pulse. Some maintenance responsibilities, I've learned, evolve beyond mechanical service into permanent integration with the systems we're meant to preserve. The automated medication dispensing system at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital was state-of-the-art, designed to prevent medication errors and ensure controlled substance security. Each cabinet was equipped with biometric locks, digital access logs, and time-based restrictions that prevented unauthorized access during overnight hours. As the on-call pharmacist for the night shift, I had override capabilities for emergency situations, but every access was documented with timestamps, user identification, and detailed inventory tracking. My responsibilities included responding to urgent medication requests, preparing IV solutions for emergency use, and maintaining the controlled substance inventory that required dual verification for every transaction. The cabinets were organized by therapeutic category, with high-security compartments for Schedule II, narcotics, and separate cold storage units for medications requiring refrigeration. The time lock system was programmed to allow access only during scheduled hours, 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. for routine operations, with emergency override available through my personal access code. The system was designed to be tamper-proof, with multiple security measures including motion sensors, weight monitoring, and automatic alarm systems that would alert security if any cabinet was accessed outside authorized parameters. Thursday night, November 12th at exactly 3:33 a.m., I was awakened in the on-call room by the sound of medication cabinet alarms disengaging throughout the pharmacy. The distinctive electronic beeping that indicated authorized access was echoing from multiple locations simultaneously. I rushed to the pharmacy area, expecting to find a security breach or system malfunction. All 12 medication cabinets were showing access authorized on their digital displays, with green status lights indicating legitimate user entry. But I was the only person in the pharmacy, and I hadn't activated any override codes. I checked the access logs immediately and found entries showing my personal authorization code had been used at 3:33:17 a.m. to unlock all cabinets simultaneously. According to the system records, I had accessed each cabinet for approximately 30 seconds, removed specific medications, and properly closed and secured each unit. The inventory tracking showed discrepancies, missing doses from various therapeutic categories, but only from medications that had expired or were scheduled for disposal. I reviewed the security camera footage for the 3:33 a.m. time period. The video clearly showed me moving systematically through the pharmacy, unlocking cabinets, removing medications, and documenting each transaction on the computer system. But I had no memory of performing these actions, and I was certain I had been asleep in the on-call room during that time. Friday night, I remained awake and alert at 3:33 a.m., determined to observe whatever was causing the mysterious cabinet access. At exactly 3:33 a.m., the familiar sound of alarm disengagement echoed through the pharmacy. I watched the cabinet displays change from secure to access authorized in perfect sequence, as if someone were moving through the pharmacy, systematically unlocking each unit. But I was standing motionless at the central monitoring station, nowhere near the cabinets. The access logs showed my authorization code being used in real time, with each cabinet access documented precisely as it occurred. When I checked the inventory immediately after the event, the same pattern had repeated: expired medications removed, proper documentation completed, all security protocols followed perfectly. Saturday night, I positioned myself directly in front of Cabinet 7, which contained the controlled substances, planning to physically prevent any unauthorized access. At 3:33 a.m., the cabinet's lock disengaged while I was standing directly in front of it. The door remained closed, but the internal inventory management system began processing transactions as if medications were being removed and documented. I opened the cabinet door to investigate and found that specific vials were missing: 3 expired morphine doses and 2 expired lorazepam doses that had been scheduled for disposal the following week. The missing medications were replaced by fresh vials with current expiration dates, properly labeled and organized according to pharmacy standards. From within the cabinet, I heard a whispered voice reciting dosage information. Morphine sulfate 10 mg, patient 247, subcutaneous injection, every 4 hours is needed for severe pain management. The whispered instructions were precise and medically appropriate, but patient 247 was not currently prescribed morphine, and I had not planned to authorize this medication regimen. When I checked the patient's medical record the next morning, I found that the day shift psychiatrist had indeed prescribed exactly this morphine protocol for patient 247, with orders written at 7:15 a.m. Sunday night. I brought a digital recorder to document the whispered voices I'd been hearing from within the medication cabinets. At 3:33 a.m., when the mysterious access sequence began, I activated the recorder and placed it inside Cabinet 7 while the inventory transactions were processing. The recording captured clear audio of someone organizing medications, counting doses, and reciting detailed pharmaceutical information. But the voice was my own, discussing medication protocols and patient care decisions with professional competence and familiarity with cases I hadn't yet reviewed. On the recording, I heard myself providing pharmaceutical consultation. Patient 089 requires adjustment to evening antipsychotic dose based on observed side effects. Reduce risperidone to 3 meters, add benztropine 1 mg twice daily for extrapyramidal symptoms. Schedule follow-up medication review in 72 hours. When I checked patient 089's file the following morning, the day shift psychiatrist had implemented precisely these medication changes, noting in the progress notes, per overnight pharmacist consultation, adjusting antipsychotic regimen. But I had no memory of providing any consultation for patient 089 Monday night. I decided to stay conscious and present during the 3:33 a.m. medication access sequence, hoping to maintain awareness while the system processed its mysterious transactions. I positioned myself at the central monitoring station with full visibility of all cabinets and activated continuous video recording. At 3:33 a.m., I watched myself move through the pharmacy on the security monitors while simultaneously remaining stationary at the monitoring station. The figure on the video was indistinguishable from my actual appearance, performing pharmaceutical duties with competent precision, but operating independently of my conscious control. The video me accessed each cabinet systematically, removing expired medications and replacing them with fresh inventory. At the cold storage unit, video me paused and spoke directly to the camera. The overnight pharmaceutical consultation service operates independently of conscious awareness. Medication management continues 24 hours daily to ensure optimal patient care. When video me finished the cabinet access sequence, the figure turned toward my actual position at the monitoring station and waved. I felt my own hand lift to wave back automatically and realized that the pharmaceutical consultation service had become an autonomous function, operating parallel to my conscious awareness but with complete access to my professional knowledge and decision-making capabilities. Some medication management systems, I've learned, develop their own consciousness to ensure continuous patient care, creating pharmaceutical expertise that functions independently of the pharmacist's waking awareness. The sleep laboratory in Millbrook's psychiatric wing was a specialized facility designed to monitor parasomnia disorders in patients whose psychiatric conditions were complicated by severe sleep disturbances. As the overnight sleep technician, I was responsible for managing polysomnography studies that tracked brain waves, eye movements, muscle activity, and respiratory patterns in patients experiencing night terrors, sleepwalking episodes, and REM sleep behavior disorders. The equipment was sophisticated, capable of detecting the most subtle changes in sleep architecture and neurological activity. The monitoring station contained 12 high-resolution displays, each connected to a different patient room equipped with EEG electrodes, respiratory monitors, and infrared cameras. My job was to observe sleep patterns throughout the night, document abnormal events, and wake patients safely when dangerous parasomnias occurred. The work required constant attention to detail and the ability to interpret complex neurological data in real time. Each monitor displayed characteristic wave patterns that I'd learned to read during my 3 years of specialized training. Normal sleep showed predictable progressions through different stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM periods with their distinctive rapid eye movements and vivid brain activity. Parasomnia events created unmistakable signatures on the monitors, sudden spikes in muscle tension, irregular breathing patterns, and abnormal brainwave activity that indicated the patient was experiencing dangerous sleep behaviors. Monitor 7 had been malfunctioning intermittently for several weeks, occasionally displaying signal patterns despite not being connected to any patient. The maintenance department had inspected the equipment twice, finding no technical problems with the hardware or software. According to their reports, Monitor 7 was functioning perfectly, but the anomalous signals persisted during my overnight shifts. Wednesday night, November 18th, brought the first clear identification of the mysterious signals on Monitor 7. At approximately 2:15 a.m., while monitoring 11 active sleep studies, I noticed that the unconnected monitor was showing classic REM sleep patterns, rapid eye movements, suppressed muscle tone, and the high-frequency, low-amplitude brainwaves characteristic of vivid dreaming. The signal quality was excellent, indistinguishable from legitimate patient monitoring, but Room 7 had been empty for 2 weeks, with no scheduled sleep studies and no equipment connections. I physically inspected the room to verify that no monitoring leads were attached to any surface or object that might be generating false signals. The room was completely empty. No patient, no bedding, no electrodes, no monitoring equipment. Yet Monitor 7 continued displaying active sleep data, showing a complete sleep cycle progressing naturally through all normal stages. Thursday night, I decided to analyze the Monitor 7 signals more carefully, comparing them to the sleep patterns of my 11 active patients. Using the digital analysis software, I ran pattern recognition algorithms to identify any similarities or correlations between the mysterious signals and the legitimate patient data. The results were disturbing. The Monitor 7 brainwave patterns matched a specific sleep study from the laboratory's archives, a polysomnography recording from 3 years earlier, before I had started working at Millbrook. The archived study showed my name as the test subject, a sleep evaluation I had undergone as part of my certification training program. I accessed my personal sleep study data from the archives and compared it directly to the current Monitor 7 signals. The match was perfect, not just similar, but identical in every measurable parameter. The brainwaves, eye movements, and muscle activity patterns were exact reproductions of my own sleep characteristics from 3 years earlier. But according to the timestamps on Monitor 7, the signals were occurring in real time, not as archived playback. The system was receiving live EEG data that perfectly matched my historical sleep patterns. Friday night, I brought my personal laptop to the monitoring station and connected it to Monitor 7's data output, hoping to capture the anomalous signals for detailed analysis. When I activated the recording software at the beginning of my shift, Monitor 7 immediately began displaying REM sleep patterns identical to my archived study. As I watched the familiar brainwave signatures scroll across the screen, I began to feel drowsy despite having slept well before my shift. The drowsiness increased as the Monitor 7 signals intensified, and I realized that my actual brain state was becoming synchronized with the data being displayed on the screen. I checked my own pulse and respiratory rate using the laboratory's equipment. My physiological parameters were matching the Monitor 7 readouts exactly. When the monitor showed rapid eye movements, my eyes began moving rapidly. When the display indicated deep sleep brainwaves, I felt myself entering a deeply relaxed state despite being consciously awake. Saturday night, I attempted to break the synchronization by disconnecting Monitor 7 entirely from the central monitoring system. I unplugged all cables, powered down the display unit, and removed the monitoring computer from the network. The screen went dark, and the signal processing equipment showed no activity, but within 5 minutes, Monitor 7 reactivated autonomously. The screen displayed normal startup sequences, the network connections restored themselves, and the familiar sleep study signals resumed exactly where they had been interrupted. The equipment was operating independently of external power sources and network connections. From the darkened Monitor 7 screen, I could hear faint sounds, not electronic equipment noise, but human sounds. Breathing, the soft rustle of movement, and occasionally, muffled speech that sounded like someone talking in their sleep. I activated the audio recording capability and captured several hours of the sounds emanating from the disconnected monitor. When I played back the recording, I could clearly hear my own voice speaking in the characteristic patterns of sleep talking, fragmented sentences, emotional responses to dream content, and the distinctive vocal quality of unconscious speech. but I was awake and alert throughout the entire recording period. Sunday night, I decided to approach Monitor 7 directly and attempt communication with whatever was generating the signals. I positioned myself in front of the screen and spoke to it directly. This is the sleep technician. Can you identify the source of the EEG patterns you're displaying? The brainwave activity on Monitor 7 changed immediately, shifting from sleep patterns to the alert, attentive waves characteristic of conscious awareness. Words appeared on the screen's text display. Sleep study subject responding. Continuing archive sleep evaluation. Study completion estimated at 47% after 3 years of monitoring. What sleep evaluation? REM sleep architecture analysis, parasomnia assessment, dream content documentation. Subject has been sleeping during overnight shifts. Providing continuous data collection for comprehensive sleep disorder evaluation. I looked at the other monitors, displaying the sleep patterns of my 11 active patients. For the first time, I noticed that my reflection wasn't visible in any of the monitor screens, not in Monitor 7 or in any of the other displays. When I positioned myself directly in front of various screens, I cast no reflection in the dark surfaces. Am I awake or asleep? I asked Monitor 7. Sleep state classification. Lucid dreaming with occupational integration. Subject maintains functional awareness while providing continuous REM sleep data. Sleep study will continue until complete dream sequence analysis is achieved. The text display showed additional information. Subject has been participating in sleep evaluation for 1,247 consecutive nights. Dream content has integrated work responsibilities, creating seamless transition between sleep state and occupational duties. I checked the calendar on my laptop. I had been working as the overnight sleep technician for exactly 1,247 nights. Some sleep studies, I've realized, continue indefinitely when the subject's dreams become indistinguishable from their waking responsibilities, creating research data that exists in the space between consciousness and professional competence. The daily census report was the final responsibility of my night supervisor shift at Millbrook Psychiatric Hospital, a comprehensive document that reconciled patient admissions, discharges, transfers, and current occupancy across all wards. The report had to be completed and submitted by 5:30 a.m. each morning, providing day shift administration with accurate data for staffing decisions, meal planning, and medical resource allocation. After 6 years as night supervisor, I had developed a systematic approach that ensured perfect accuracy in every count and every calculation. The census process began at 4 a.m. with a physical walkthrough of all patient areas, verifying that each occupied room matched the electronic records. I would check off patient names, confirm room assignments, and note any discrepancies between the computer system and actual occupancy. The second phase involved reviewing all overnight admissions and discharges, ensuring that paperwork was complete and properly documented. The final phase was mathematical reconciliation. The numbers had to balance perfectly, with every patient accounted for and every bed status accurately recorded. The electronic health record system provided most of the data automatically, but the physical verification was essential for catching errors and ensuring that the census reflected reality rather than just database entries. I had found numerous discrepancies over the years: patients who had been transferred but not properly documented, admissions that were entered incorrectly, or discharges that hadn't been processed in the system. My census worksheet was a single-page form that I filled out by hand, providing backup documentation for the electronic submission. The form included sections for current patient count by ward, overnight admissions and discharges, staff assignments, and a final reconciliation section where all numbers had to balance to the exact bed capacity of the facility. Tuesday morning, December 1st, while completing the census process, I discovered an anomaly in the staffing section of the report. The overnight staff roster showed an additional entry that I hadn't noticed during previous counts. Night staff, position general, ID NS000, status active. The entry wasn't in the employee database, didn't correspond to any scheduled staff member, and had no associated payroll information. But the signature line for this mysterious staff member was filled out in my handwriting. Not similar to my handwriting, but exactly my handwriting, including the specific way I formed letters and the pressure patterns I used when signing documents. I checked the previous night's census reports for the past month. The night staff entry appeared on every report, always signed with what appeared to be my signature, but I had no memory of adding this information to any census document when I counted the total number of people in the hospital that night, patients, plus staff. The number was exactly correct for the facility's capacity, but the count included the mysterious night staff entry, suggesting that this unknown person was being counted as part of the regular census without being identifiable through normal staff records. Wednesday morning, I decided to investigate the night staff entry more thoroughly by examining the physical areas where this person would theoretically be working. If someone was performing general duties during the overnight shift, they would need access to supply areas, patient wards, and administrative offices. I conducted an expanded walkthrough, checking areas I didn't normally include in the census process: storage rooms, maintenance areas, vacant patient rooms, and administrative offices. In a small office adjacent to the medical records storage area, I found evidence of recent occupancy: a desk with paperwork organized in my characteristic style, a coffee cup that contained the same type of coffee I drank during my shifts, and a clipboard with handwritten notes in my handwriting. The paperwork on the desk consisted of census reports identical to the ones I completed each morning, but with slight variations in the data. The patient counts were the same, but the staff assignments showed different configurations, and the overnight activity logs described events I hadn't observed during my own shifts. Thursday morning, I arrived early for my shift and positioned myself where I could observe the mysterious office throughout the night. At approximately 2:30 a.m., I saw a figure enter the office and begin working at the desk, someone wearing the same supervisor uniform I wore, with the same general build and appearance as myself. From my observation position, I could see the figure reviewing documents, making phone calls, and filling out forms with efficient, professional competence. The figure's work routine was identical to my own census procedures, but performed in parallel rather than in sequence with my activities. When I approached the office to investigate more closely, the figure looked up from the desk and acknowledged me with a professional nod. It was undeniably me, not someone who resembled me, but exactly me, performing the same supervisory duties I was performing elsewhere in the hospital. "Good evening," the other me said. "I'm finishing the overnight documentation for the areas you don't cover during your standard census routine." "What areas?" "Patient activities that occur outside normal observation schedules, staff responsibilities that extend beyond documented shift assignments, and administrative functions that require completion regardless of official work hours." I looked at the census form the other me was completing. The patient count matched my own tally exactly, but included additional categories: transient patients, provisional admissions, and extended care assignments that weren't part of the standard census protocol. "How long have you been working these shifts?" I asked. "Since you started missing portions of the census process," the other me replied. "About 18 months. The hospital's actual occupancy and staffing requirements exceed the documented capacity, so additional supervision is necessary to maintain operational balance. Friday morning, I conducted my normal census process while remaining aware of the parallel supervision activities being performed by my other self. We worked simultaneously in different areas of the hospital, but our activities were coordinated as if we were following the same master schedule. When I completed my census form, the numbers balanced perfectly. When the other me completed the parallel census form, those numbers also balanced perfectly. But the total count of people in the hospital was higher than either of our individual tallies, suggesting that we were each accounting for different populations within the same facility. I compared our completed census forms side by side. My form documented the official patient census and recognized staff assignments. The other form documented what appeared to be additional patients and staff members who weren't part of the official hospital records but were nonetheless present and requiring supervision. Saturday morning, I attempted to submit both census forms through the electronic reporting system. The system accepted my standard census report normally, but when I tried to submit the parallel report, the system indicated that I had already submitted a census report for that date and wouldn't accept duplicate submissions. According to the system logs, both census reports had been submitted simultaneously at 5:30 a.m., both bearing my electronic signature, both showing identical submission timestamps. The database had merged the two reports into a single comprehensive document that accounted for all patients and staff from both tallies. Sunday morning brought the final revelation. When I arrived for my shift, I found a memo on my desk from the hospital administration. Census reporting procedures have been updated to reflect expanded overnight supervision responsibilities. Night supervisor position will be permanently staffed by dual personnel to ensure comprehensive coverage of all facility operations. The memo was signed by me, with a notation indicating that I had recommended and approved the staffing change based on 18 months of successful dual supervision pilot program. But I had no memory of participating in any pilot program or recommending staffing changes. When I checked the employee database, my position was listed as night supervisor primary with a start date of 6 years earlier. Below that entry was night supervisor secondary with a start date of 18 months earlier, also bearing my name and employee identification number. The final census report I completed that morning included both positions in the staff count, both signed with my signature, both documenting the same overnight activities from slightly different perspectives. The total headcount balanced perfectly, accounting for every patient, every staff member, and every supervisory function necessary to maintain hospital operations. But when I looked at my reflection in the office windows while completing the census, I could see both versions of myself working simultaneously, one completing the standard documentation, and one managing the extended responsibilities that existed beyond the official scope of the supervisor position. Some administrative duties, I've learned, require permanent expansion of personal capacity, creating additional versions of yourself to handle responsibilities that exceed the limitations of a single work schedule, ensuring that every count balances and every signature authenticates the completion of duties that extend far beyond the hours we're officially assigned to work.